Across every organisation in the world, one of the most common pieces of analysis we budget versus actual. It tells us if the organisation is performing as expected. Finance people have been building these with static formulas since the first incarnation of Excel. Well, we now have group by and pivot by functions, which are far from static. But can we use them to compare budget and actual? You bet we can, and that's what we're looking at in this video. So if you're ready, let's get started. The layout of our data will determine if we use group by or pivot by for a specific situation. We loosely have two formats. Group by works best with a categorized layout, where budget and actual values are deemed to be separate attributes of a record, and therefore the values for each exist in separate columns. Pivot by works best with a flat layout, where the budget and actual values are in a single column, with another column detailing if that value is a budget or an actual value. If your inputs are in a different layout, then we can use other techniques to get them into one of these layouts first. But these are the formats that we need to make group by or pivot by easy to use. Now let's go and take a look at each of these in turn, and we're starting with group by. On the left, we have the data that we are using for our example, and you'll notice that we have a column for budget numbers and a column for actual numbers. For this example, we are going to use the group by function. The first argument of group by is the row fields. This is what we want to categorize by. In our example, that's going to be our product column. The second argument is values. These are the value columns that we want to calculate on. Initially, we are going to select both the budget and actual columns. The next argument of function is the calculation that we want to perform on those values. In this scenario, we want to use a sum. We can then close our bracket and calculate. That now gives us our unique product list and the sum for our budget column and the sum of our actual column. The next challenge is, how do we get the variance column? Well, let's edit our group by, and what we're going to do is, rather than select budget and actual, we're going to select the columns individually inside an H-stack function. The first column we need is budget, the second is actual, then for the third column we want to perform a calculation, and that is going to be our actual minus our budget. That means that on a row by row basis, that calculation is performed to get the variance row by row, and then we sum up all of those values. We can then close our H-stack, and when we calculate, we now get the variance column. We now have a challenge. How can we calculate the percentage variance? A pivot table does this using calculated fields, which are calculations based on values existing in the pivot table. While group by doesn't have calculated fields, we can apply the same thinking of picking up existing values from the group by and using them in subsequent calculations. Let's edit our formula. At the start, we will add the let function. Let allows us to calculate interim values and then use those values in subsequent calculations. So we're going to create an interim calculation called calc, and that will be the result of the group by function. Then we want to calculate our percentage variance. I will enter an opening bracket, and to get the actual value, we're going to use the chooseCols function. The array we want to use is our calc variable, so that's the result of our group by, and we want column 3 because actual is the third column in our group by result. Then we want to minus, and we're going to use chooseCols again. We are again going to reference our calc variable, and this time we want to minus the budget, so that is column 2. We can then close both of those brackets. Then we want to divide by our budget result. For that, we can use chooseCols once again. We want to use our calc variable, and we want column 2. So that now calculates our percentage variance. Next, we want to H-stack both our calc and our percentage variance into a single array. To do that, I will create a variable called result, and then we want to use H-stack, and we want to stack the calc and the percentage variance together. For the final argument of let, we want to declare which value we want to return, and we want to return our result. We can then close that bracket at the end and calculate, and that now gives us the percentage variance result. So that's how to calculate budget versus actual with group by. But we're not done. What if our data is in a flat layout? In that scenario, we can use the pivot by function. So let's go take a look. Once again, we have our data on the left, but this time, rather than a budget and an actual column, we have a column called version, which contains the words budget or actual, and we have the value. So we have unpivoted our data into a flat layout. Let's start by building our pivot by function. For our first argument of row fields, we want to select the product column. For the second argument of col fields, these are the values that we want to appear across the top. We need to select our version column. Then for our values, we want to select the value column. Next, we have the function argument, and we want to perform a sum calculation. This now gives us columns for product, actual, budget, and total. And we also have a header row along the top. We have a few issues here, so let's edit our formula and use the optional arguments that are available inside pivot by. Now, we're not going to go through these arguments in detail. For field headers, we can use the default value. For the total row depth, we can use the default value. For the row sort order, we can also use the default value. When we come to the col total depth, we don't want to display a total column. Therefore, we're going to enter 0 for no totals. Then for the col sort order, we want to sort budget and then actual, which is in descending order. So I'm going to enter -1. We can then close that bracket and calculate, and we now have the data that we want, but we still have the header row that we want to remove. So let's edit our formula. At the start, we're going to add the drop function. The array will be the result of the pivot by, and then at the end, we want to drop the first row. When we calculate that, it now gives us our product, our budget, and our actual. In the original data, budget and actual are in the same column, so we can't easily calculate the variance as we could in the previous method. However, we can still apply the thinking of calculated fields to add the additional columns that we need. So let's edit our formula. At the start, we're going to add the let function once again, and then we're going to create a variable called calc, and we're going to apply our drop and pivot by combination to that variable. We need to calculate a column for the variance. For that, we're going to use choose cols that we based on our calc, which is the result of our drop and pivot by, and we want column 3, which is our actual values. Then from that, we want to minus the choose cols once again. We're going to reference that same calc variable, and this time we want the budget, which is in column 2. So now our variance is our actual minus our budget. Next, we want to calculate our percentage variance. For that, we're going to take our var variable, and we want to divide that by the choose cols of our calc variable, and we want column 2, which is the budget values. Next, we want to create our result. That is going to use the hstack function once again, and this time we want to stack the calc, the variance, and the percentage variance. Then for our final argument in let, we want to declare which value we are going to return, and we want to return our result variable. And when that calculates, we get exactly the same result as we had before. We have a unique list of products, then we have our total budget, our total actual, followed by the variance between budget and actual, and then the percentage variance between those values. And that's it. That's how to provide budget versus actual analysis using group by and pivot by. If you like this video, then you are going to love our Excel Academy. That's the place where we go deep into all the techniques so you can truly master Excel. Then you can stop wasting time on shuffling numbers around on a grid and start completing your work super fast with less stress. Just head over to exceloffthegrid.com to find out more. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in another video. See you next time.